What happens when the weakest member of the pack becomes its greatest weapon? For Alara Thorne, life as an Omega in the Silvercrest pack meant keeping her head down, her voice quiet, and her existence as small as possible. She served without complaint, cleaned without recognition, and endured the daily cruelties of pack hierarchy with silent resilience. The daughter of Beta counselors, who looked at her with something between disappointment and pity, Alara had learned early that being powerless meant being invisible. But when Alpha Garrett Kane rejected her as his fated mate in front of the entire pack during the Harvest Moon ceremony, severing their bond with cold precision and choosing another in her place, everything changed. And what happens next, no one was prepared for. Because Alara didn't beg. She didn't cry. She didn't fight back. And in her silence, ancient magic began to crack, and a prophecy older than the pack itself started to wake. The great hall of Silvercrest shimmered with candlelight, and the nervous energy of 200 wolves gathered for the most sacred night of the year. The Harvest Moon ceremony was when the moon goddess revealed fated mates, when bonds snapped into place with divine certainty, when destinies intertwined beneath her silver gaze. Alara stood at the very back of the hall, pressed against the cold stone wall, trying to make herself smaller still. The scent of her nervousness, lavender turning acrid with fear, mixed with the morning dew that always clung to her skin, creating an aroma of vulnerable sweetness that made stronger wolves wrinkle their noses in disdain. She shouldn't be here. Omegas rarely attended the ceremony except to serve, to refill goblets and clear plates. But something had pulled her here tonight, a sensation like invisible threads tugging at her sternum, making her heart race for reasons she couldn't name. Her inner wolf, always so quiet, so dormant, stirred with unusual restlessness. Alpha Garrett Kane stood on the raised dais, magnificent in his authority. At 28, he was everything an alpha should be. Tall, broad-shouldered, radiating dominance like heat from a forge. His scent filled the hall, forest after rain, embers from a dying fire, ozone before a storm, and beneath it all, cold steel. It was a scent that demanded submission, that reminded every wolf present of their place in the hierarchy. Beside him stood Leanna Pierce, the pack's most beautiful warrior. Her auburn hair cascading down her back like liquid copper, her scent of cinnamon and iron marking her as a fighter, a perfect alpha female. The elder began the ritual, calling upon the moon goddess to reveal the bonds she had woven. One by one, wolves stepped forward as the pull became undeniable. Marcus found his mate in young Sophia, their bond igniting with shared joy. Thomas and Elena, who had loved each other in secret for years, finally felt the snap of destiny confirming what their hearts already knew. Each pairing brought cheers, celebration, the joy of the goddess's design made manifest. Then it happened. Ilara's entire body went rigid, a sensation like lightning, like falling, like being unmade and remade in a single instant, tore through her. The bond didn't snap into place, it exploded. Every nerve ending in her body screamed with recognition, with rightness, with a connection so profound it brought her to her knees. Across the hall, Garrett's head snapped toward her, his eyes widening with shock and something that looked dangerously close to horror. No, this couldn't be. An Omega? His fated mate was an Omega? The hall fell silent. 200 wolves watched as their alpha stared at the small, trembling girl against the back wall. Alara felt their eyes on her like physical weight. She felt the bond pulling her forward, singing through her blood, begging her to go to him, to complete what the goddess had begun. Her wolf whimpered, desperate and confused, Garrett's jaw clenched. A wave of power washed over the hall, his alpha command thick enough to choke on. When he spoke, his voice carried no warmth. No recognition of the gift they'd been given. No. One word. Just one. But it shattered something fundamental in the universe. The moon goddess has made an error, he continued, his tone formal, each word a chisel carving away at Alara's soul. I, Alpha Garrett Kane of Silvercrest Pack, reject the bond. I reject the Omega. I choose instead to take Leanna Pierce as my mate, as is my right as Alpha. Time stopped. The world tilted. Alara couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what was happening. This didn't happen. Fated mates were sacred, divine, unbreakable. You didn't reject the goddess's gift. You didn't. The pain hit her like a physical blow. The bond, barely formed, began to tear. It felt like being ripped in half, like every cell in her body was being pulled apart. She doubled over. A strangled sound escaping her throat. Not a scream, not quite, because even now she wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Blood dripped from her nose. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. "Remove her," Garrett ordered, turning his back on her as if she were already forgotten. "Exile her beyond our borders. An Omega who thinks herself worthy of an Alpha has no place in Silvercrest." Alara didn't fight when the guards grabbed her arms. She didn't speak when they dragged her through the hall, past 200 faces that showed pity, disgust, relief that it wasn't them. She didn't cry when they threw her into a cell for the night, letting the rejection complete its brutal work. The bond severed with surgical cruelty, leaving a gaping wound in her chest that bled power, potential, and possibility. Her parents came at dawn. Elena and Marcus Thorne, beta counselors, who had always looked at their daughter with confused disappointment, stood outside her cell, with shame etched into every line of their faces. But they didn't open the door. They didn't plead for mercy. "It's for the best," her mother whispered, her scent carrying guilt thick as smoke. "You were never meant for this life, Alara. Perhaps this is the goddess's way of setting you free." Her father said nothing at all. By midday, they stripped her of everything: her pack bonds, her family name, her right to shelter or protection. The guards escorted her to the northern border, where the territory gave way to the howling wastes, a stretch of wilderness so hostile that even rogues avoided it. Storm clouds gathered overhead, pregnant with the season's first blizzard. "Turn back, and we kill you on sight," the head guard said without emotion. "The Alpha has spoken." They left her there with nothing but the thin dress she'd worn to the ceremony, and a pain in her chest that made every breath agony. The first snowflakes began to fall as she stumbled into the wilderness, and Alara Thorne walked forward, because there was nowhere left to go but away. The blizzard descended with merciless fury. Within an hour, Alara couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing at her inadequate clothing, stealing the warmth from her body with eager cruelty. Her bare feet were numb, leaving bloody prints in the snow. The scent of her own fear mixed with the metallic tang of her blood, a trail any predator could follow. She didn't know how long she walked. Time lost meaning in the white void. Her thoughts fragmented, skipping like stones across water. She thought about her parents' faces, about the way they'd let her go so easily. She thought about Garrett's cold eyes, about how quickly he'd chosen power over destiny. She thought about all the years she'd been invisible, powerless, nothing. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was nothing. The barn appeared through the snow like a miracle, though part of her wondered if she was already dead, and this was some cruel afterlife. It was ancient, half collapsed, barely standing against the wind. But it had walls, a roof of sorts, it would have to be enough. Ilara crawled inside, her body shaking so violently she could barely control her limbs. A pile of rotted hay in the corner. It would have to serve as a bed. She curled into it, pulling what remained over herself, and felt her consciousness starting to slip away. The cold was inside her now, in her bones, in her blood. The rejection wound in her chest throbbed with each weakening heartbeat. This is it, she thought with strange clarity. This is how I die. Alone. Unwanted. Nothing. Her eyes drifted closed. The storm raged outside. And somewhere in the darkest part of the night, her breathing became shallow, then barely perceptible. Then, warmth. It came slowly, pulling her back from the edge. Heat against her left side, her right, radiating around her. The scent hit her next. Wild, primal, ancient. Not pack wolves. Something older. Something other. Ilara's eyes fluttered open. Even that small movement took monumental effort. Wolves surrounded her. 1. She counted them through her haze, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. 2. Massive forms pressed against her, their body heat a barrier against death. 3. 4. 5. They kept appearing from the shadows, each one enormous, each one radiating power that made her pack's alpha seem like a puppy in comparison. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 massive wolves formed a living cocoon around her, their silver-white fur seeming to glow in the darkness. They'd arranged themselves with military precision, creating a shield against the storm, sharing their warmth, their breath misting in the frozen air. One lay with his massive head near hers, watching her with eyes the color of winter frost. Ancient, knowing, patient. His scent washed over her. Aged oak, winter snow, pine, and storm. It was a scent of authority so profound, it made Garrett's dominance seem like a child playing at power. Ilara's throat worked. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. The great wolf's lips pulled back, not in aggression, but in what might have been a smile. Then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, he began to change. The transformation was nothing like the pack's brutal shifts. This was fluid, elegant, reality bending to accommodate something magnificent. Where the wolf had been, a man now crouched. Tall, broad, his face marked by scars that spoke of 1,000 battles. His dark hair shot through with silver, despite looking no older than 40. He wore furs and leather that seemed grown rather than sewn, and when he looked at her, she felt seen for the first time in her life. Because, he said, his voice like distant thunder, "We've been waiting for you." Confusion must have shown on her face, because his expression softened. "Rest now, little Omega. Or should I say..." His eyes gleamed with knowledge that made her wolf, dormant for so long, suddenly keen with attention. "Should I say, matriarch?" The word echoed in her mind, as consciousness slipped away again. But this time, she fell not into death, but into the deepest, safest sleep she'd ever known. Ilara woke to firelight, and the sound of voices speaking in low tones. Her body ached, but the bone-deep cold was gone, replaced by the warm weight of furs piled over her. She was no longer in the barn, but in some kind of cave system, the walls smooth and covered in ancient markings that seemed to pulse with faint light. She tried to sit up. Every muscle protested. Easy. The man from before, the one who'd spoken to her, appeared at her side with a wooden cup. "Drink. It'll help." The liquid was warm, herbal, soothing. As it went down, Ilara felt strength returning to her limbs. She studied him more carefully now. He wore authority like a second skin, but it was different from Garrett's domineering presence. This was earned, ancient, absolute. Who are you? Her voice was stronger now. My name is Carl. He settled back on his heels, giving her space. Commander of the Shadow Guard. And you, Alara Thorne, are the answer to a prophecy we've been following for over a century. I don't understand. Her hand went to her chest, to the wound that still ached where the bond had been severed. I'm nobody. I'm just an Omega. Weak. Powerless. Is that what they told you? Kale's voice carried something dangerous. Let me guess. You were always different. Your parents looked at you with fear disguised as disappointment. You were kept separate, pushed down, made to believe you were less than. Your wolf was always quiet, always sleeping. Each word hit like a hammer. How do you? Because they bound you. He leaned forward, his frost-colored eyes intense. Your parents, when you were just an infant, bound your power with old magic. They were terrified of what you were, what you would become. So they crippled you, made you weak, made you Omega when you were born to be so much more. The cave seemed to spin. That's not possible, isn't it? Kyle stood, moving to the cave wall, where the glowing markings pulsed brighter at his approach. There's an old prophecy, Alara, one that's been passed down through the ages, whispered in old tongues, carved into sacred spaces. Would you like to hear it? She nodded, mute, her world fracturing around her. Kale's voice took on a rhythmic quality, ancient and powerful. When the harvest moon bleeds silver light, and the unworthy claims the throne of might, the matriarch will rise from rejection's pain, born of silence, forged in disdain. She will be mighty when they sought her meek. She will be sovereign when they called her weak. She will come when the wolf packs tear apart, and reforge the world with a sovereign heart. Silence fell. Alara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might escape her chest. Your parents knew, Kale continued softly. They were shown the prophecy when you were born. They saw the mark of the matriarch, a silver crescent that appeared on your shoulder blade before they bound you. So they hired a dark mage, and they locked your power away, thinking they were protecting the pack from chaos, thinking they were doing what was necessary. You're lying. But even as she said it, Alara's hand moved to her shoulder blade, feeling the skin there. She'd always had a birthmark there, faint, easily overlooked, a crescent moon. The binding was tied to your first fated mate bond, Kyle said. When that bond formed and was accepted, the binding would remain forever. But if the bond was rejected, his eyes glittered with fierce satisfaction. If the bond was rejected, especially with the violence and cruelty of a public ceremony, it would shatter. The binding would break. And everything they locked away would be free. Alara's breath came faster. Inside her, something was stirring. Her wolf, her silent, sleeping wolf, was waking, and she was angry. A wave of power washed over the cave. The other 9 guards, who'd been standing watch near the entrance, all turned to stare at her with expressions of awe. Alara gasped as sensation flooded through her. Not pain, but potential. Energy. Strength. Everything that had been locked away for 22 years, suddenly surging through channels that had been dry and empty. What's happening to me? She clutched at the furs, her whole body beginning to shake. You're becoming who you were always meant to be. Kyle's voice was gentle now, reverent. Don't fight it, matriarch. Let her wake. Let her rise. The wolf inside her opened eyes that blazed with silver fire. For the first time in Alara's life, she heard her wolf's voice, and it was nothing like she'd imagined. It wasn't small or timid or broken. It was massive, ancient, powerful beyond measure. "I'm awake," the wolf said, and her voice shook the foundations of Ilara's mind. "And I am furious." The transformation began. Later, Ilara would struggle to put the experience into words. It wasn't the painful, bone-breaking shift that pack wolves endured. This was something else entirely, a metamorphosis that felt like coming home, like remembering, like becoming real for the first time. Her bones didn't snap. They flowed, lengthening and strengthening with liquid grace. Power surged through her marrow, remaking her from the inside out. Her senses exploded. Suddenly, she could hear the heartbeat of every creature within a mile, could smell the individual scents of all 10 guards, could taste the storm that still raged outside on her tongue. Fur emerged, not the simple brown or gray of common wolves, but silver-white that seemed to capture moonlight even here in the depths of the cave. It rippled across her skin like water, like living starlight. Her muscles expanded, gaining mass and power that should have been impossible. Energy erupted from her core, radiating outward in waves that made the ancient markings on the walls blaze with recognition. She grew, and grew, and grew. When the transformation completed, Ilara stood on 4 legs in the center of the cave, and her head nearly brushed the ceiling 15 feet above. She was massive, larger than any alpha she'd ever seen, her form more mythic than natural. Her fur glowed with an inner light, silver traced with threads of gold that moved like living things. And her eyes, she couldn't see them, but she felt their power, burned with silver fire that cast shadows, dancing across the cave walls. The 10 guards dropped to one knee as one, their massive heads bowed in submission and reverence. "Matriarch," they spoke in unison, their voices carrying harmonics that resonated in her bones. "We are yours." Ilara tested her new form, taking a step forward. The ground trembled beneath her paws. She could feel the earth itself responding to her presence, ancient magic recognizing one of its own. Power thrummed through her veins like molten starlight. She opened her jaws and howled. The sound that emerged was nothing like a normal wolf's call. It was layered, harmonic, carrying frequencies that shouldn't exist. It shook the cave, brought down small avalanches of snow outside, and traveled across the wasteland like a shockwave of pure authority. Every wolf within 50 miles would feel that howl in their bones, would know that something ancient and powerful had awakened. In Silvercrest, Garrett's head snapped up from his desk, his newly formed bond with Lyanna forgotten as primal recognition flooded through him. What was that? What had he just felt? Back in the cave, Kale raised his head, and his scarred face split into a fierce grin. "Yes," he breathed. "She is risen. She is magnificent. She is the matriarch." Ilara shifted back to human form, and this time the transition was effortless, natural. She stood naked but unashamed, power still radiating from her skin like heat. The wound in her chest where the bond had been severed was gone, replaced by something else, a sense of completion that came from within rather than from another. She was no longer the girl who'd been cast out. She was no longer the silent, suffering Omega. She was something else entirely, and as she looked at Kale and his 9 guards, her guards now, she felt the first stirrings of what might have been hope. "Teach me," she said, and her voice carried authority that made even Kale's eyes widen with approval. "Teach me everything." The days that followed blurred into a montage of discovery and growth. Kyle and his shadow guard became Ilara's teachers, her protectors, her family, in ways her blood relations had never been. Each morning began with shifting practice. The first few times were awkward, as Ilara learned to control the immense power that now flowed through her veins. She'd shift too fast, or hold the form for too long, or let her emotions color her wolf's appearance. When angry, her fur would darken to storm cloud gray. When peaceful, it would lighten to pure silver white. Kyle watched every session with patient intensity, offering guidance in his rumbling voice. Power without control is just destruction waiting to happen. You're not just learning to shift, matriarch. You're learning to be the bridge between human and wolf, between mortal and divine. But the shifting was only the beginning. One morning, Ilara woke to find one of the younger guards, a wolf named Finn, badly injured from a hunting accident. His leg was mangled, bone showing through torn flesh. The pack healer had done what she could, but infection was setting in. Ilara knelt beside him without thinking, her hands hovering over his wound. Something inside her knew what to do. Power flowed from her palms, silver light that sank into his skin. She felt his pain, his fear, his gratitude, and she took the pain into herself, transforming it, returning only healing. When she pulled her hands away, the wound was closed, new skin pink and perfect. Finn stared at his leg in wonder. "How did you—" "She's empathic," Kale said from the cave entrance, his voice carrying satisfaction. "The matriarch doesn't just command. She feels. She heals. She connects. Every gift that was locked away is now yours to master." The guards took turns teaching her their specialties. Finn taught her tracking, showing her how to read scent trails days old, how to distinguish between wolves by the subtle variations in their chemical signatures. Reese, a massive warrior with kind eyes, taught her combat. "You're powerful," he said, circling her in the training circle they'd cleared outside the cave. "But power means nothing if you don't know how to use it. An enemy will try to exploit your size, use your strength against you." He was right. The first few sparring sessions left Ilara flat on her back, confused about how a wolf smaller than her kept winning. But she learned. She adapted. Her empathic abilities let her sense his intentions before he moved, and soon she was holding her own. Then winning, then dominating, with a combination of raw power and tactical brilliance. Sarah, the only other female in the guard, taught her politics. "The matriarch isn't just a warrior," she explained, her scent of sage and moonlight calming in the evening air. "You're a leader, a queen. You need to understand pack dynamics, alliances, the delicate dance of power between territories. Elena, Mira, Ash, Torin, Drake, and Marcus. Each guard had their specialty, their wisdom to share. And slowly, Ilara began to understand what she'd been given. Not just power, but purpose. Not just strength, but a family who'd waited over a century for her to be born, who'd tracked the prophecy across generations, who'd been searching for her since the moment she'd drawn her first breath. "We felt you," Kyle told her one night, as they sat by the fire and the others slept. "The moment you were born, every member of the Shadow Guard felt the pull. We've been watching you from the shadows your entire life, waiting for the binding to break, waiting for you to wake." "You could have told me," Ilara said softly. "You could have helped me before." "No." His voice was gentle but firm. "The binding had to break naturally. If we'd interfered, it might have killed you. The rejection, as brutal as it was the only way to shatter it completely." He paused, his frost-colored eyes reflecting the firelight. "I know it doesn't make the pain less, but everything you suffered had purpose." Ilara stared into the flames, feeling her wolf settle contentedly in her chest. The wound of rejection had healed, replaced by something stronger. She wasn't defined by Garrett's choice anymore. She was defined by her own. "Tell me about the Shadow Guard," she said, changing the subject. "How did you become what you are?" Kale's expression grew distant, nostalgic. "We were the first," he said. "Centuries ago, when the moon goddess still walked among wolves, she created guardians to protect her matriarchs. We were blessed, changed, made into something more than ordinary wolves. Dire wolves, some call us. Mythic guardians. We don't age like normal wolves. We live for centuries, waiting, watching, serving the prophecy." He looked at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "We've been alone for so long, matriarch. Waiting for you felt like waiting for the sun to rise after an endless night." "My name is Alara," she said softly. "When it's just us, call me Alara." He smiled, a real smile, rare and precious. Alara. Days turned to weeks. Winter deepened, but inside their cave system, warmth and purpose flourished. Alara grew stronger, more confident, more completely herself than she'd ever been. She could shift in heartbeats now, could maintain her wolf form for days without strain, could tap into her empathic abilities to read the emotional currents of everyone around her. She learned the command voice, the ability to speak with such authority that other wolves had no choice but to obey. It was terrifying and intoxicating, and Coyle made her practice until she could modulate it, using only as much power as necessary for each situation. She discovered she could create a pack link, connecting minds the way alphas did with their pack members, but hers was deeper, more intimate, allowing her to share not just thoughts, but emotions, sensations, even memories. And through it all, she healed. The broken, rejected girl who'd stumbled into the wastes was gone. In her place stood a queen who'd earned her crown through suffering and emerged from fire tempered into something unbreakable. But peace, Alara was learning, was always temporary. It was Sarah who brought the warning, her fur dusted with fresh snow, her scent sharp with alarm. "Matriarch, we have a problem." Alara looked up from the herb garden she'd been tending. Another new skill, learning which plants had medicinal properties. "What is it?" "Scout from Silvercrest. I caught his scent half a mile out, trying to stay downwind. He saw me, but more importantly..." Sarah's lips pulled back in a snarl. "He saw you. Yesterday, when you were practicing your howl outside the cave. He was too far for me to catch, and by the time I tracked him, he'd already crossed back into Silvercrest territory." The peace shattered like glass. Ilara's wolf surged forward, silver eyes blazing through human ones. "How long do we have?" "A day, maybe 2 if we're lucky." Kyle appeared from the training circle, the other 9 guards materializing around them with military precision. "Garrett won't ignore this. You're supposed to be dead, and instead you're not only alive, you're powerful. That's a threat to his authority, his pride, his position." Ilara's mind raced through possibilities. Run? Hide? No. She was done running, done hiding. If Garrett wanted a confrontation, she'd give him one, but on her terms. "We prepare," she said, and her voice carried command that made even Kale straight into attention. "Sarah, Reese, scout the perimeter. I want to know the moment they cross into the wastes. Finn, Drake, set up defensive positions around the cave. Everyone else, with me. We need a strategy." The Shadow Guard moved with practiced efficiency, and Alara felt pride swell in her chest. These warriors had waited centuries for her, and she'd be damned if she let them down now. The war party arrived 2 days later at dawn. 23 wolves, all warriors, all radiating aggression and dominance. At their head ran Garrett Kane, his massive brown wolf, larger than his pack members, but still dwarfed by what Alara knew waited for him. Beside him ran Leanna, her auburn fur gleaming in the early light, her scent of cinnamon and iron marking her as eager for violence. Alara stood in front of the cave in human form, wearing leather and furs that Sarah had made for her, her silver hair, Another change from the transformation. Her once mousy brown locks, now luminous, hung loose down her back. The mark of the matriarch blazed on her shoulder blade, visible to anyone who looked. Behind her, in the shadows of the cave entrance, 10 massive forms waited. Garrett shifted to human form 20 yards away, and his pack followed suit. Even naked in the snow, he radiated arrogance and authority. His forest and steel scent rolled toward her, and Alara felt nothing. No pull, no pain, no longing. The bond was truly gone, and she'd never been happier to be free. "So," Garrett said, his voice carrying clearly across the space between them. "The Omega survived. I'm almost impressed." "I'm not an Omega." Alara's voice was calm, level, carrying power without needing to shout. "I never was. You're whatever I say you are." Garrett's eyes flashed gold. "You're also a threat, an unaligned wolf with delusions of power, squatting in territory that borders mine. That can't stand." Liana stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted with cruel anticipation. "You should have died in the snow," she said. "Would have saved us all this trouble. But don't worry, we'll finish what the blizzard started." The scent of her bloodlust hung thick in the air, and Alara's wolf growled low in her chest. This female thought herself a warrior, thought herself strong. She had no idea what real power looked like. "Last chance," Garrett said. "Submit to my authority, return to Silvercrest as the lowest Omega, and I might let you live. Refuse, and we'll tear you apart and scatter the pieces across the wastes." Alara smiled. It was not a kind expression. "You made a mistake, Garrett." Her voice dropped, taking on harmonics that made several of his warriors shift nervously. "You didn't just reject me. You didn't just cast me out. You broke the chains that bound me. You set me free. And now you're going to learn what that means." Liana snarled and shifted, her wolf exploding forward without waiting for Garrett's command. She was fast, skilled, her auburn fur a blur as she closed the distance with lethal intent. Her pack howled their approval, scenting blood already. Alara didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't shift. 10 yards. 5. 3. Liana leaped, jaws wide, going for Alara's throat. Reality bent. One moment, Alara was human. The next, she simply wasn't. The shift happened faster than thought, faster than sight. Where a woman had stood, now towered a mythic wolf so large that Liana seemed like a pup in comparison. Silver-white fur blazed with inner light, eyes of molten silver fixed on the airborne wolf with devastating focus. Alara moved. She caught Liana mid-leap with one massive paw. The force of it driving the smaller wolf into the ground, hard enough to crater the snow. Liana yelped, stunned, the wind driven from her lungs. Before she could recover, Alara's jaws closed around her scruff, not biting, not injuring, just holding, and tossed her aside like a mother wolf disciplining an unruly pup. Liana tumbled through the snow and lay still, conscious, but utterly beaten in a move so effortless it barely qualified as a fight. The silence was deafening. Garrett stared at Alara with dawning horror. His warriors backed away, whimpering, their dominance forgotten in the face of something their instincts recognized as apex, as sovereign, as other. Then the Shadow Guard emerged from the cave. One by one, they stepped into the light and shifted. And as they did, Garrett's carefully assembled war party realized they hadn't come to fight wolves. They'd come to face gods. The Shadow Guard's true forms were magnificent and terrifying. Each one towered over even Garrett, their fur ranging from storm gray to midnight black to silver white. Their eyes glowed with power that predated the pack's, that remembered when the moon goddess walked the earth. These were dire wolves, mythic guardians, warriors who'd fought battles in centuries past that had shaped the entire wolf world. Kyle stood at Alara's right, his massive form radiating authority that made Garrett look like a pretender wearing a crown he hadn't earned. His aged oaken storm scent washed over the clearing, and several of Silvercrest's warriors dropped to their bellies in automatic submission. "I am Commander Kale of the Shadow Guard," his voice boomed. "We are the goddess's first warriors, blessed and eternal, and we serve the matriarch. We have waited centuries for her return. And now?" His frost-colored eyes fixed on Garrett with predatory intensity. "Now she is here. And you, little Alpha, have made a very grave error." Garrett's face had gone white. His pack was in chaos, wolves breaking formation, whimpering, a few trying to slink away entirely. Even the bravest among them recognized they were hopelessly outmatched. "This isn't possible," Garrett whispered. "The old stories, the prophecies, they're just myths." "Do I look like a myth?" Alara's voice carried without shouting, layered with harmonics that made it clear she was speaking not just with human vocal cords, but with something more fundamental. "I am the matriarch. I am what your pack elders whispered about when they thought no one was listening. I am what your parents bound when they should have nurtured. I am what you rejected, and in your arrogance, you freed." She took a step forward, and the ground trembled. "You came here with 23 warriors, thinking to kill one weak Omega. Instead, you found 11 dire wolves and a queen who could end you with a thought." Garrett's wolf whimpered inside him, pulling at his mind, begging him to submit, to kneel, to acknowledge the power before them. But his pride, his ego, his desperate need to maintain control warred with instinct. "I'm an alpha," he ground out. "I bow to no one." "Then you're a fool." Kyle's voice was almost pitying. "The alpha rank is mortal, political, temporary. The matriarch is divine, eternal, absolute. You can cling to your pride, or you can save your pack. Choose quickly." Around them, Silvercrest's warriors were making their choice. One by one, they shifted back to human form and dropped to their knees, heads bowed, necks bared. Some were crying. All were terrified. They'd been ready to kill, and instead, they'd found something that could erase them from existence without effort. Within minutes, Garrett stood alone. His carefully assembled army had surrendered without a single additional blow being struck. "Mercy," one of the warriors called out, a young male whose scent carried desperation. "Great matriarch, we didn't know. We were following orders. Please, mercy!" Alara looked at them, these wolves who'd come to kill her, who'd served under an alpha too arrogant to recognize truth. And she felt pity. They were victims of Garrett's pride as much as she'd been. "Rise," she said, and her command voice carried gentle authority. The warriors stood on shaking legs. "I am not cruel. I am not a tyrant. But I am also not weak, and I will not tolerate threats against me or mine." She shifted back to human form, standing naked but unashamed before them all, her silver hair lifting in a wind that seemed to follow her will. The mark of the matriarch blazed on her shoulder, undeniable proof of what she was. "Hear me now, wolves of Silvercrest," she said, and her voice carried across the clearing, across the wastes, perhaps all the way back to the packlands themselves. "I am Ilara Thorn, the matriarch, blessed by the moon goddess and guarded by the shadow. I lay claim to these wastes as my territory. Any wolf who enters without permission will be considered hostile. Any pack that threatens my sovereignty will be met with force." She turned her gaze on Garrett, who stood frozen, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "You rejected me publicly, brutally, with cruelty and disdain. You cast me out to die. And in doing so, you made the single greatest mistake of your life. I could destroy you now. I could tear apart your pack. Could claim Silvercrest as mine by right of power. Could make you pay for every moment of suffering you caused. Hope flickered in Garrett's eyes, quickly suppressed. But I won't. Alara's voice gentled slightly. Because vengeance is empty, and I am done being defined by your choices. Instead, I offer you this. I will spare you and your pack. I will leave Silvercrest to you. But you will acknowledge my sovereignty. You will recognize my claim to these lands. And you will change. Change? Garrett's voice was hoarse. No more will Omegas be treated as worthless. No more will pack members be cast out to die for failing to meet arbitrary standards. You will implement laws protecting the weak, providing for those who cannot fight, creating a pack based on more than just dominance and cruelty. Her silver eyes bored into his. You wanted to be alpha? Then be a real leader. Be worthy of the position you chose over destiny. She stepped closer, and Garrett actually flinched. And Garrett? If I hear of you breaking these terms, if I hear of cruelty or injustice in your pack, I will return. And next time, I won't be merciful. Do you understand? Garrett's throat worked. Everything he'd believed, everything he'd built his identity on, had just been shattered. I understand. Good. Alara turned to address the warriors again. Return to Silvercrest. Tell them what you saw here. Tell them the matriarch has risen. Tell them a new age has begun. The warriors didn't need to be told twice. They shifted and ran, their forms disappearing into the distance. Within minutes, only Garrett and Leanna remained, the former defeated, the latter still lying where she'd been tossed, too stunned to move. Garrett looked at Alara one last time. Something in his expression might have been regret, might have been recognition of the magnitude of what he'd lost. He shifted to human form once more. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand what you were. You should have tried. Alara's voice wasn't cruel, just sad. You should have trusted the goddess. You should have been kind. But you chose power over love, pride over destiny. Now live with that choice. Garrett nodded once, a sharp, defeated movement. Then he shifted back to wolf form, grabbed Leanna's scruff to rouse her, and the two of them disappeared into the distance, leaving only tracks in the snow. The Shadow Guard gathered around Alara, their massive forms creating a living shield. Kyle shifted back to human and draped a fur around her shoulders, his touch gentle. You showed mercy, he said. That was wise. Mercy tempered with warning, Sarah added, appearing at her other side. A true leader's approach. Alara looked at her guards, her family, and felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the furs. I am the matriarch, she said, testing the title on her tongue, feeling how it fit. This is my territory, and anyone who threatens what's mine will learn that mercy has limits. Thunder rumbled in the clear sky, or perhaps it was approval from something greater. The matriarch had risen, and the wolf world would never be the same. The weeks following the confrontation transformed the wasteland. Word spread rapidly through the territories. The matriarch had returned, the old prophecy fulfilled, a new power rising in the north. Some packs sent scouts to verify the rumors. Others sent diplomats bearing gifts and offers of alliance. A few sent nothing, waiting to see if this new matriarch would fade like a shooting star or burn eternal like the moon. Alara chose eternal. With the Shadow Guard's help, she established a proper territory. The cave system became a fortress, expanded and improved with wolf ingenuity and ancient knowledge. Rogues seeking sanctuary began to arrive. Wolves cast out from their packs for being different, for being weak, for failing to fit into rigid hierarchies. Ilara welcomed them all, building something new. Not a pack in the traditional sense, but a haven, a refuge, a place where worth was measured by character rather than strength alone. She learned governance from Kyle, who'd advised matriarchs in ages past. She learned healing from Sarah, who taught her the deepest mysteries of empathic medicine. She learned warfare from Reese and Finn, honing her abilities until she could fight with both devastating power and surgical precision. And she learned something else, something unexpected. She learned love. It happened gradually, like the turning of seasons. Kyle had been her teacher, her protector, her commander. But somewhere in the long northern nights, in the quiet moments between training sessions, in the warmth of shared glances and gentle touches, their bond had deepened into something more. One evening, as they stood on a cliff overlooking the wasteland, now green with early spring growth, Kyle took her hand. "I've waited centuries for you," he said quietly, his aged oak and storm scent wrapping around her like an embrace. "Served the prophecy, searched for the matriarch, dedicated my existence to a purpose I'd never seen fulfilled. But now," he turned to face her, his frost-colored eyes warm with emotion. "Now I understand. It wasn't just about the prophecy. It was about you. Ilara, I didn't just wait for the matriarch. I waited for you." Ilara's breath caught. The bond that formed between them wasn't like the forced, fated connection with Garrett. This was choice, pure and simple. A decision made with open eyes and full hearts. The moon goddess didn't mandate this love. She simply smiled upon it. "I choose you," Ilara said, her voice steady and sure. "Not because of prophecy or destiny, but because you saw me when I was broken and helped me become whole. Because you waited for me through centuries of loneliness. Because you're kind and fierce and wise and mine." The bond snapped into place, but this time it was beautiful. Silver light bloomed between them, visible to the naked eye, marking them as chosen mates in the ancient way. The Shadow Guard, watching from below, howled their approval, their voices carrying joy across the wasteland. Kyle pulled her close and kissed her, and Ilara felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. Not because she needed him to be whole, but because she'd chosen to share her wholeness with someone who truly deserved it. Summer brought new challenges. A pack from the Eastern Territories, led by an arrogant alpha named Victor, decided to test the matriarch's strength. He arrived with 50 warriors, declared her sovereignty illegitimate, and demanded she submit to his authority or face annihilation. The battle lasted 7 minutes. Ilara met them in her true form, her massive silver wolf radiating power that made Victor's army hesitate before the first blow was struck. When they attacked anyway, the Shadow Guard showed why they were legends. The Eastern Wolves fell like grain before a scythe, not killed, but thoroughly, completely defeated. Victor himself knelt before Ilara within minutes, his nose pressed to the ground, whimpering for mercy. She granted it, with conditions. By autumn, 3 more packs had tested her. 3 more had learned the price of arrogance. Word spread further. The matriarch was real. The matriarch was powerful. The matriarch was not to be challenged. But Ilara didn't rule through fear alone. She also showed compassion, wisdom, and justice. When drought struck the Southern Territories, she sent aid without being asked. When a plague threatened to wipe out a smaller pack, she and Sarah traveled there personally, using their healing abilities to save hundreds of lives. When border disputes erupted between rival packs, She mediated with fairness that earned respect from all sides. She became not just a sovereign, but a leader worth following. Packs began to swear allegiance voluntarily, seeing in her the kind of rule they'd always deserved, but never received. And through it all, her family grew. The Shadow Guard remained her core, her foundation, but others joined them. Wolves who'd proven their loyalty, their wisdom, their worth. Her territory expanded, not through conquest, but through willing alliance. The wasteland bloomed under her care, becoming not a place of death, but of life. One evening, as the first snow of a new winter began to fall, Ilara stood before the assembled leaders of 15 packs who'd come to swear their allegiance formally. She wore a crown made of silver and moonstone, crafted by the finest artisans among her people. Beside her stood Kael, her chosen mate, his hand steady in hers. The Shadow Guard flanked them, proud and powerful. "You come here seeking to join something greater than yourselves," Ilara said, her voice carrying clearly through the great hall they'd built. "You come seeking protection, justice, wisdom. I offer you all of that. But I also demand something in return, your commitment to a new way. No more will strength alone determine worth. No more will the weak be cast aside as worthless. We build something better here. We build a world where every wolf, regardless of rank or power, has value. Where leadership is earned through wisdom and compassion, not just dominance and fear." She let her gaze travel across the assembled alphas, betas, and representatives. "I am the matriarch. This is my territory. These are my laws. Swear to uphold them, and you will find in me the greatest ally you could imagine. Break them, and you will find I am still capable of being the most terrifying enemy." One by one, they knelt and swore their oaths, and the matriarch's kingdom grew. But on the horizon, something stirred. A blood moon was rising, and ancient evils whispered in the dark. The prophecy had spoken of Ilara's rising, but it had also warned of trials to come, of enemies that would test everything she'd built. Ilara felt it, a shadow on the wind, a warning in her bones. She'd won the first battles, established her sovereignty, found her family and her love. But this was only the beginning. Greater challenges awaited, threats that would require everything she'd learned, everyone she'd gathered. All the power she'd reclaimed. She was ready. She was the matriarch. And whatever came next, she would face it with silver eyes blazing and her pack at her side. The wasteland had become a kingdom. The rejected Omega had become a queen, and her story was far from over. And so Ilara's journey from broken Omega to sovereign matriarch reached its first great milestone, but not its ending. She'd transformed from the girl who'd accepted rejection with silent dignity into a leader who commanded respect from all who encountered her. She'd learned that true strength came not from dominance, but from the choice to be compassionate, even when cruelty would be easier. That power meant nothing without wisdom to guide it. That the family you choose can be stronger than the family you're born into. The wolf world watched with bated breath as this new order took shape. Some with hope, seeing in the matriarch's rise the promise of change they'd long dreamed of. Others with fear, knowing their corrupt ways would no longer be tolerated. And still others with anticipation, wondering what challenges would come to test this queen who'd forged herself from rejection's fire. If you've been captivated by Ilara's transformation, if her journey from outcast to sovereign resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment struck you most deeply? Was it her first transformation? Her choice to show mercy to Garrett? Or perhaps the love she found with Kael? Drop a comment below sharing your favorite part of the story. And if you enjoyed this tale, please hit that like button. It helps more people discover these stories. Don't forget to subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss the next chapter in the Matriarch's saga. Because trust me, with that blood moon rising and ancient evil stirring, Ilara's greatest challenges are still to come. Thank you for listening to this tale of rejection, transformation, and the power of choosing yourself even when others cast you aside. We'll see you in the next chapter.